Hello, welcome to Podsongs. I'm Jack Stafford, and I interview inspiring people in service to others as inspiration for a new song. Now, I'm often hearing on the radio and online, woke people did this, cancer culture folks did that, but I don't really understand what it means. Here in the south of Italy, we haven't got there yet. So I thought I'd ask an American philosopher to help me out. So my guest today is an assistant professor of philosophy at Portland State University. His areas of academic focus include atheism, critical thinking, scientific skepticism, and the Socratic method. He's written many books, including a manual for creating atheists and how to have impossible conversations. So I'm not completely in agreement with all of that, being a spiritual person myself, but let's have a difficult conversation. Please welcome Peter Boghossian.
So how did you hear about my work?
Well, to tell the truth, I've been quite out of touch with things for quite a few years. I've tried to avoid watching the news for obvious reasons.
Probably good. Yeah.
And but with this podcast project, now I'm having to write meaningful songs that sum up the state of modern society, and I don't have the ammunition, so I need to speak to people who do. And because quite a few of my friends have told me, because I've been the bit I have picked up, is from the BBC and things like that. The Black Lives Matter is great, and the Me Too movement and all these new social movements for change are very positive, and but a few of my friends are quite worried about it, and they say that the shift to the left and the way things could go is towards communism, and we know in history how many millions of people have been killed by their own governments.
I'm always. So this is a huge conversation right here. Do you want to start? Do you want to just, because we could pick it up right from there, because there's a lot of stuff to talk about right in that.
Yeah, well, this conversation is not going to strain you intellectually, because I'm living in the south of Italy here. You're in Portland. You're in the epicenter of
madness.
Yeah.
In fact, my friend's business. Just yesterday, his name is Matt Thornton. You could find him on Alive as Ape. He has a jiu-jitsu business. It's called Straight Blast. And the looters and the anarchists and Antifa destroyed the Whole Foods on Sandy up here in the northeast Portland. And they spray painted and damaged a number of other shops. And there were no arrests made. The police didn't come out. In fact, there was a kidnapping. It's in the Oregonian. You can read it. There's a kidnapping, an active kidnapping. I think the police took over an hour to come to that. So it's you're right. Portland is the epicenter. I want to get back to something you've said before. So many people are afraid of this quote unquote radical leftist takeover. I'm not really afraid of that at all. What I'm concerned about is I'm concerned about identity politics, and we can define that. I'm concerned about the shift away from truth and toward identitarian concerns, toward subjectivity. I'm concerned about the fact that the divides in this country are so deep right now, and so many people are armed. I'm deeply concerned that we're not speaking to each other in any kind of a meaningful way. Everybody views everybody else as an existential threat. And it is not merely enough to criticize bad ideas. We have to show a way forward. And the way forward is dialogue, discourse. It's the same thing it's been for thousands since Socrates, right? 2,400 years ago. It's the same thing. But the problem is, how do we help people value those things that will lead to their own well-being and the well-being of their communities? That's the money question.
That's why I wanted to speak to you, is because you've written this book, How to Have Impossible Conversations, and you're a left-wing, self-confessed left-wing professor in in Portland, and but you yourself have called for more conservative professors to be brought in. So you're calling an alarm on this. So what are the dangers?
Well, not just conservative professors. So certainly that's an aspect of this. I think, getting back to John Stuart Mill's dictum, the philosopher, I think people have to be, young people in particular, have to be taught by people who actually believe the arguments that's presented to them. So I teach an atheism class, for example. It's a little bit different now online. This is my first term teaching online, but I always try to have people come in and speak to the students and articulate a view I don't believe. So, for example, I had Mark Sargent. So I don't want to make this a right or left thing. I had Mark Sargent, who's a leader in the Flat Earth Society, come in and speak to the class. I've taken very strong positions on what I consider to be the most uncontroversial of all stances, that the Earth is more shaped like a sphere. I've had Nick Pope come in.
Yeah.
I'm being very serious with you. I've had Nick Pope come in, who was a remarkably articulate and smart guy who was in charge of figuring out for the British if there were alien abductions. He had a military classification. So I've had Christian apologists come in. But the key is that we need intellectual diversity. Kids need to hear, students more broadly need to hear arguments from people who believe them. Right. And what we have now is an ideology mill. We have an ideology mill based upon a moral orthodoxy that happens, it happens to be morally fashionable. These ideas are not rationally derivable. In fact, they're disprovable. And this is I can explain this, and I find this fascinating. I'm happy to explain this.
Please, yes.
Why this is. Okay, so let's go into this a little bit. So in a sane society, a society that values reason, evidence, discourse, problem solving, community, etc. If we, and I'll put you in this basket for a moment. I don't know anything about your beliefs. If we wanted to solve a problem and we agree that it's a problem, what we would do is we would look at evidence. We would use the scientific method. We would look at the best arguments on all sides of the coin, and we would rationally deliberate steps forward to ensure the health of our community. Is that reasonable?
That sounds great, yeah.
Yeah, okay. That's not what we're doing now. What we're doing now is we're creating ecosystems and monocultures. What we're doing now is we're separating by ideology. This is spearheaded by the universities. The most egregious instances are in the universities. And again, that's why I don't want to make this a conservative liberal thing. It has nothing to do with that. Literally, it has nothing to do with that. Those words are almost meaningless. So the folks advocating against this is such a huge idea. Okay, I'm going to try to explain this. No, this is a massive idea. So I'm going to trace this out, and if you have any questions, stop me.
Okay, great.
Okay. So maybe our podcast will center on this.
Okay.
So there's a woman, Aubrey Lord, who has a sentence. It's actually the title of a work. The master's tools cannot disassemble, take apart the master's house. So what are the master's tools? Reason, science, discourse, epistemic adequacy, which is just a fancy way of saying you know what you're talking about. So the master's house, in their conceptions of this, one idea is it's the patriarchy, it's white supremacy, it's heteronormativity, it's cis ableism, what have you. I can unpack those if you want. So the idea is you cannot use reason, evidence, etc., to disassemble or disable or render impotent the patriarchy and other oppressive systems that keep down minorities, sexual minorities, etc. You need another tool set to do that. The other tool set that they're providing is basically your feelings, and they put that in your lived experience. You've probably heard that, your lived experience, right? It's from this it's from something in the academy called standpoint epistemology. All this stuff, the infrastructure for all this stuff, the moral infrastructure is all the academy. So they've taken away the very tools of analysis that people use to solve problems, and they're offering their own epistemology or way of knowing. And their way of knowing centers on the marginalized and people who have been traditionally disenfranchised from participation in civic life. So I just dumped a ton of stuff on you. If you have questions, you ask me, and then I'll do my best to articulate responses within that context.
So you're saying I can understand that maybe if you were living under a communism or under a dictator, and you can't rationalize with that system. But so they're saying that even in democracy, the master's tools are you can't rationalize the way out of that.
You can't use traditional tools like evidence. So look, let me give you an example. Let's say that we want to figure out, let's say that we've determined that it's a problem. And I'm not saying this is the case. I'm just saying this is a hypothetical.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say that we've determined it's a problem that police pull over more members of minority communities, say more African Americans than they do people who are not African Americans.
Okay.
And let's just accept by fiat for 5 minutes that that's true. The way that, and also let's figure out, let's just assume that either we think it's a problem or we're trying to figure out if it's a problem. Okay. But let's just assume that those factors are in place so we can have this conversation, okay? Okay. Well, what you would do is you would just use the tools. That's one of the easiest things to figure out. There's a margin of error, of course, but you would get the self-reports of officers and maybe say, well, okay, so those are skewed. Maybe they don't want to appear racist, so they don't claim to. Okay, that's fine. So we look at the body cam footage, right? Mm-hmm. Like there are pre-existing tools that we have access to that can help us answer those questions. And all of those tools, literally 100% of them fall within the realm of science.
Okay.
So let's say that we have somebody who wants to give his testimony, and notice the word testimony, the religious kind of verbiage. He wants to give his testimony that he's African American and he's been pulled over by police more often. Which do we value more? Do we value an individual's testimony, or maybe groups of individuals' testimony, or do we value data? That's my question to you.
Yeah, well, if the data's not biased, the data's been.
Yeah, we look at the data, and if the data is biased, then the only way the way we would know that there's a bias, we figure that out, and then we correct for that bias. We say, oh well, look, why is it that cops turned off their body cams in these pullovers, right? So maybe they make a rule: no turning off your body camera. Everybody has to have it. But the point is, without delving into the logistics of how you do that, there are ways to figure out these problems.
Yeah, maybe the police should be doing more outreach, to try and solve these perceptions.
Yeah, right. Whatever they happen to be, but whatever it is, we would know what that is through science.
Okay.
Not through, sacrificing a goat on the hood of a car, right? So we already have the same tools that we would use for literally anything else in society. We use for questions, we ought to use for questions of race, gender, sexual orientation. These are extremely important questions, and they're simply not being examined with the most robust, rigorous methodologies.
So this person, Abby Lord, says you can't, because it's all biased, it's all collected by the system, all this data is inherently biased.
And you can't disassemble, the master's house, so you should, the best, if anybody wants to read something, simply the best work on all of this, without any question, is Cynical Theories by Helen Pluckrose and James Lindsay. It is the in fact, didn't you have Jim on your podcast?
No, not yet, no.
Oh, I thought you had him on your podcast. You sure?
Yeah. I'll put him on the list, top of the list now. I'm not going to hang up on you, though. I want to finish this one first.
No. Yeah. So, no, I thought he told me. Maybe he's wrong. Okay. So the point is, so getting back to your point, it's not just about we have conservatives and we have liberals and we need intellectual diversity. We need students to hear from in an economics department, for example, from Keynesians, from Friedmanites, from Marxists, from communists, from
there's a huge spectrum, isn't there? I mean,
yeah. And then what we need to do is we need to create a academic milieu in which the people who sit in those lectures and go to the talks, of course it's different than pandemic now, or maybe go to online talks, they feel free to express their opinion. They feel free without fear of retribution or being called a racist or a Nazi or a homophobe or a bigot. Or we have to we have to take the shackles off and enable people to ask sincere inquirers, to ask sincere questions, because that's the way we move forward as a society.
That's democracy, yeah.
That's democracy. There has to be a mechanism in place that allows, but the problem is that we are so far from that, and we don't have a culture that we have created conditions that are inimical to our flourishing.
So what's happening then? What's the situation at the moment for you as a professor in Portland?
The situation for me, well, I was just denied promotion. That was very interesting. It's the first time I've said that publicly, actually. Okay. I had letters from the former head of the American Philosophical Association, from Dennett. Even their letter writers said that I should receive promotion. So it's an interesting situation. I've been told by the university that I'm not allowed to, by Julie Carrion from the Office of Global Diversity and Equity. I can't remember the exact name of the office, and I asked for this in writing, and I wasn't given this in writing, but I have to really watch what I say in the classroom, particularly if it's about, like, I don't have to watch what I say. I can say, swear, or I can talk about animals, abuse, all I want, because they're not protected classes. So anything that deals with a protected class, I cannot render my opinion or teach in a way that my opinion could be. I mean, I have the verbiage, I wrote it down in the meeting, but so I have to really be careful of what I say, or else it's just a theft of my time for the diversity office. But, I've always known that my time at PSU is limited. They may institute even more equity initiatives, which will be very interesting. We should probably talk about what equity means. I just mentioned James, but James on his New Discourses site has a wonderful, he just disambiguates and defines words as they're used in the literature. But there's a possibility we'll have to sign equity statements, and then I would have to very seriously consider whether or not I wanted to. I could continue on with any integrity.
Mm-hmm. So what would that mean? Equity? You have a part in the system, or you have a share? Or what context?
See, that's right. That's the people who haven't been indoctrinated, right? That's because you're someone who. Yeah, I mean that's how they hoodwink you, right? That's how they get you. They get you by co-opting words that have standard meanings and either changing the meanings of words or using the words in very non-standard ways that is reinforced or buttressed by veins of literature. So I don't know. I'd have to see what the equity statement said before I would even think about it. They certainly have equity initiatives, and as I've said, literally 10,000 times before, equity is not equality. And in fact, I tweeted something out about this as a Jeopardy question, the equal treatment of all people. And this, one of the contestants, Bert, said, "What is equity?" And then Alex said, "No." So that's, so
that passed me by.
Yeah. So, okay. So that's not equity. So we need to talk about equality is not equity.
Okay.
Equity is redistribution of shares based upon past injustices. So that's a quick definition.
Okay, I can get that.
Okay, that's how they use the definition, right? So people from traditionally, historically marginalized groups, they get a greater share.
Like the American Indians or the black slaves.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So by definition, that's not equal.
Okay, because it's a retrospective.
It's the opposite. It's the opposite of equal.
Okay.
Because the moment you start taking in somebody's ethnic lineage or what have you, then you're treating them you're not treating them equally by definition.
Do you think there should be some redistribution? Do you think there should be some?
That's another question.
Okay.
That's another question. The question is, when you smuggle these concepts in, because equity sounds cool, right? It sounds like a good word.
Yeah, it does.
It sounds like, oh yeah, equity. It has a positive valence to it. Oh yeah, equity. Like, yeah, equity. I'm in favor of equity. Equity sounds like you could substitute that for, it sounds like a good thing.
Yeah.
I'm in favor of things that sound like a good thing. I'm in favor of equity. It'll be the syllogism for that. So whether or not we ought to is a different question. People simply are not being honest about what their objectives are. But the people who are being honest about what they are, they're being incredibly honest about what they want. But the problem is that other people, it's so insane that nobody believes that they actually believe what they say. It's literally so fucking crazy that nobody believes it.
But I've listened to some very articulate Black Lives Matter speakers and say how they've, all the time, every time they've tried to raise up, every time they've tried to form communities, they've literally been knocked back down. And, they're really up against it. I mean,
and then okay, so then you tell me, what is the best way to deal with that problem?
Education and investment.
But not well. Okay, so let's talk about this. Let me just finish the last thought, and then we'll talk about this. No, don't be sorry. So I wrote a piece for the Wall Street Journal. Basically, I can't remember the title. It was basically believe them when they tell you what they believe. When people tell you what they believe, if like someone's out there, I believe in a talking snake. Like I truly believe, and they're telling you that, believe them.
Yeah.
When they tell you that they want to abolish the police,
right,
and they publish an article in the New York Times saying, I think the title is, fact check me on this, yes, we actually do mean abolish the police. You still have people saying, well, they don't really want to abolish it. I mean, it's so insane that nobody believes that they actually believe they want to abolish prisons and the police. That's part of the other problem with this, is because these ideas are so, it's not just that they're out of the mainstream, it's that they're so bizarre and pernicious at the same time that we have a hard time comprehending that the person who tells us this, it's just not hyperbole. Okay, so now let's get back to this question that you said. So look, I'm gonna give everything. I'm gonna give it all of you. Has there been historical racism? 100% yes. Has the system, redlined and disenfranchised people? 100% yes. Does this go way, 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 way back to antiquity? Yeah. Did Socrates threw the women and the slaves out of the room in the beginning of the symposium? Absolutely. Slavery, Jim Crow, on 100, no question at all. Okay. I believe, as Martin Luther King did, and actually this Michael Shermer's book, The Moral Arc, I was just reading it over today, that the moral arc does bend towards justice. And what's the best way to deal with these issues is to take the best things about the master's house and include more people in them. How do we bring in people who have been traditionally excluded from the fruits of modernity and the Enlightenment? Is it to censor people we don't like? No. Is it to punch people in the head we do not like? No. Is it to destroy businesses of people who depend on that for their livelihood? No. Okay, so we know there are wrong answers to these questions. This is not rocket science. So if there are wrong answers to these questions, we know you could not have a wrong answer unless you have a right answer.
Okay.
So there must be right answers. I'm going to suggest what the right answers are. We sit down and we have a conversation about this. We sit down and we make very strict rules about, of course, I understand it's difficult in the pandemic now, et cetera, but we also want to balance this with large gatherings of people who spread a contagion. But let's bracket that for just a moment. So we bring people who teach police tactics together and Black Lives Matter together, and we have a conversation. Why do you do this? What's the way forward? Is it true that more blacks are pulled over by the police? Why are they? Is this a problem? What do we need to do? And then we listen. We actually genuinely listen to the positions people hold so we can come to mutual solutions together. Now, let's say that we do that. Okay, so let me take a pause. How are we doing, Soph? Is that clear?
Yeah, that's fine. I'm all on the same page here. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So let's say that we do that, and then people in historically marginalized communities are still not satisfied. What do we do? Well, we do what we're doing now. We have a system that allows, for example, AOC. We have a system that allows the democratic institutions. We work through the mechanism of our existing institutions, and we have laws. We have constitution that prevents discrimination. We have civil rights acts, equal opportunity. So what do we do is we work through the system and continue to bend the moral arc towards justice. But we cannot do any of that if we have radically illiberal elements on both the right and the left. Look, this is a very small percentage of people we're talking about here. We are talking about, I will admit to you, that they are extraordinarily vocal. But this is not, I can't remember the phrase. My buddy told me he read a poll. I haven't seen the poll myself, but this is about 8% of the people on the extreme. So we're not even talking about 20% of just about 15, 16% of the people.
You mean in terms of their views?
Extreme illiberalism.
Okay.
Right. And the vast majority of those people are concentrated in the academy, and they're on the left. Right. The right wing types of illiberalism manifests itself very differently.
What is
but
the academy?
Problem is the university system.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah, and I would extend the university system to pre-service teacher education programs. So education programs where they teach our kids, where they teach teachers to teach our kids, and then it seeps out into K through 12 classrooms. Well, these are just indoctrination mills. Well, and again, it's not a question of right or left.
So that's very important positions that people are in because they're forming the opinions of the next generation.
That's correct, and they're all ideologically homogenous. No toleration is considered. You immediately right to the diversity office. So why is it that I can't render my opinion about something, but we have entire wings of university architecture dedicated to rendering their opinion on professional on issues of race, gender, and sexual orientation, but I can't render mine? Why is that?
I don't know.
Well, I'll tell you why. Because this ideology has a stranglehold. The people have systematically weeded out individuals who would call them out on this. They have an ideology. One of the core tenets of its ideology is to not consider opinions from fascists, Nazis. It's called non-consensual co-platforming. Judith Butler uses the phrase, you don't even want their articles on a site next to somebody else's articles. There's a moral infrastructure in what we term the Grievance Studies literature. And again, Helen Pluckrose has articulated this very, very well. And I would urge you to check out some of her stuff. All right, so I've just talked a lot, so go right ahead.
But you still say you're not. What you said at the beginning, that you're not worried about this, that you don't see it as a big threat, but clearly it is.
What's the it?
Well,
what's the it in that sentence?
This radicalization of this blocking out into one unified voice that with no.
Oh no, I'm terrified. I'm terrified by it. I'm utterly, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I didn't say that. If I did, I meant the it by something else. One of the reasons I'm terrified by this is that, and I've been tweeting about this forever now, that it's caused a legitimacy or a legitimation crisis, and the philosopher Jürgen Habermas uses that. We have a complete lack of confidence in our institutions now. We have the traditional gatekeepers have fallen. I published a piece in Philosopher's Magazine called Diluted Departments that I'm happy to talk about. The Southern Poverty Law Center, for example, they've gone off the rails. They're woke. We haven't used the word woke, but just as a placeholder word for a kind of critical social justice ideology. We have the ACLU, who's woke, and the recent row of person from the ACLU saying this is the hill I'll die upon. I don't know if you saw that tweet, but so we have a crisis of confidence in our judiciary. We certainly have a crisis of confidence in the executive branch in this country. So our institutions, we have a crisis of confidence in the academy. People are losing trust in our institutions. And there are many reasons for this, but the primary reason for this is that universities have created these monocultures in which they punish dissent, which that's the wellspring of this whole thing. So if you want to look at this problem, how has this problem come to manifest and is now in museums, it's in knitting communities, it's in Dungeons and Dragons, it's in just about everything you could think of.
Homogenization.
Because professors, and this is another thing we could talk about, idea laundering. It's another idea we can talk about, because professors have basically manufactured they've discharged their moral impulses in journals. They've had their friends, people they know who have the same moral impulses write in these journals. So they go in as an idea and they come out as knowledge. They go through the same trappings, the peer review process, et cetera, and it comes out as knowledge. And then what they do, it's Brett Weinstein's phrase. And then what they do is they then teach their students this, and they test their students on this.
That's clever.
They actually, yeah, it's clever. And what happens is, and think about that and how that's different from Christianity, right? So what students say, well, we don't need faith. We know that this is, we have evidence for this. And they point to peer-reviewed journals, but those have all been idea laundered.
Yeah.
And the other thing that's deranged about this whole thing, it's not just that they've been idea laundered. It's that they've fabricated whole cloth entire methodologies to prove the things that they believed in the first place. It kind of like creationism. Like they've manufactured, as I mentioned, a standpoint epistemology or action research, or they've come up with methods of knowing that justify their moral impulses, and they then get the other members of the academy to sign off on it, so it has the imprimatur of knowledge in an official-looking journal, and then people cite it. They use the same mechanisms in place for traditional journals and the peer-reviewed process.
So this is where we are now. So where does this run to?
Well, that's a very good question. That's a very, very good question. It's hard to answer. The legitimation crisis is nowhere near complete. So we have to slowly see the collapse of our institutions. It's the inevitable outcome. I don't think that there's no possible way at this point that can be short circuited. We've gone down this road far too long. Anybody who's criticizes this or attempts to point this out, for just denied promotion, or there's a culture that prevents, and also keep in mind that the folks who are doing this, these are true believers.
Right.
I was just talking to Tim Urban this morning about this. Like, these folks are, he talked about the primitive mind. Like, these are vestigial impulses from the, we've had these in ourselves, and we see them all around us in different societies. It's just we have a kind of cultural myopia that makes it more difficult to see in our own. Like we can look at blasphemy laws in Pakistan, like, holy shit, man, that's fucked up, right? but we don't have that view in the United States when we look at political correctness. Like, we say, well, of course people shouldn't say that. In the same way they say, well, of course people shouldn't draw the prophet or insult her. So the structure is the same, but the content of what we're mortified by is different. So these are just in us, but that's the other interesting thing. Sorry if I'm rambling. There's just so much here, but you also have rampant biology denialism in these fields too. So anytime you want to, and we see this in Abigail Schreier's book, Deborah So's book, we see this. Heather Hying has talked very eloquently about this as well, that that biology denialism, you have to have biology denialism because it fits in with this idea that biology is a grand narrative, right? So we don't want any, that's Lyotard's idea of postmodernism. We don't want any grand narratives here. We know that's not true. We have kind of, everybody has their own truth, et cetera, and that those are all mediated through power relations. And having a biological explanation runs counter to that. A biological explanation is just one explanation. Give you an example. So I have just organizing my bookshelf, have this book here. I was doing one of the hoax papers. I read all this stuff on fat, in the fat studies literature. It was both hilarious and terrifying at the same time. but part of the shtick is that they look at fat as is the word that you would use to describe fat as a narrative. So they don't like the word obesity because that's a medicalized narrative. It's all just stories. If you say obesity, that's just one story. Everybody has their own story. We call it fat. That's a more neutral word. That doesn't medicalize it. Again, it's a type of biology denialism. Look, there are A1Cs. I was pre-diabetic. I've been intermittent fasting and taking care of myself. It's not a joke. Diabetes contributed to my mom's death. This is serious shit. And a lot of people telling young people, institutionalizing this madness in school, telling them that, there is no obesity. It's just a way to look at it. It's just a story we tell ourselves. That's just not true. We can use the tools of science to measure that, but how convenient when you say that that science is just another story that people use. It's just a story they tell themselves, and you can have your own truth.
Wow.
So where does this go? This is a legitimation crisis. Not to mention a catastrophic public health crisis. So the more these ideas spread, the worse it becomes for everybody.
So. What are we heading towards, like 1984 with one central institution? When they pull down these institutions, what is replaced with it?
I have no idea. I couldn't possibly answer that question. This is just, you just need to sit back and buckle up. But this isn't a fucking joke. This is serious shit. Like people think, talking to Lindsay the other day, people think that they're somehow, they have confidence in the neoliberal order. Like they have confidence in the liberal order, that the liberal order will be there to protect them. But as Reagan said, every generation we're just always one generation from losing it. You have to work and fight and bleed and die for liberty. You have to fight for democracy. Because if you don't, it will be lost to you. And what will take its place? What do the people advocate? The people ripping down statues? What vision of the world have they offered us? Well, we've seen it. We've seen it in Seattle. It's Chaz. It's a fucking nightmare. But we have to be willing to talk about it. And that's what we have lost.
That's powerful stuff. Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't know where this is headed. I don't know. There are too many variables and it's too early on. Here's part of the problem. You mentioned, I guess I'm still stuck on your word conservative, but part of the problem is that many conservatives have recognized the problem of cancel culture and speech, et cetera, and safe spaces, and they've recognized this problem. But the issue with them is either they have their own ideological biases, or the reason that they're conservatives is that they're conservatives in temperament as well. So one thing we haven't talked about or haven't addressed at all that's really fundamental to understanding this whole problem is the rules of engagement. So the rules of engagement among the people who adhere to this broader ideology are not the same rules of engagement. I'll give you an example. So for the longest time, if somebody, for example, in the academy, in the university, published an article like my colleague Bruce Gilley, who published some pro-colonialism pieces in defense of colonialism, and you should listen to his podcast on trigonometry if you want to learn more about that. Gilley. He's become a close friend of mine over the years. I don't know the first thing about colonialism. Well, I mean, maybe the first thing, but I certainly don't know enough to put up any kind of intelligent defense about it. But he does. He's a full professor. He's got the academic cred. Wrote an article. They found his article repugnant. In a normal rule of engagement, what they would do is, and then we get back to the conservative thing, what they would do is they would write an article rebutting that. But these people don't play by those rules. They write to the journal editor and they have quote unquote credible death threats, which is why they retracted the article. They pulled it. They threaten my colleague. They bring him up on Title IX violations, which he then posted. They don't play by the same rules. They don't go through our institutions. They attack police officers, for example, as an extreme manifestation of that. They throw feces on you. They carve swastikas into my door or leave bags of shit by my door. They do not play by the same rules of engagement. Jeez. And when you understand that they do not play by the same rules of engagement, then you also understand why conservatives can't win. Conservatives can't win because usually they're conservatives in their temperament as well. So think about the line infantry in the Civil War. There's a bunch of people standing in a row with muskets and they're shooting at the enemy and the enemy is shooting back. And the conservatives are saying, well, hey man, if we just get enough people with muskets, we got better training, etc. Meanwhile, these fuckers are behind you throwing, throwing Molotov cocktails at you, right? They're taking your family, they bring your wives and children up and they use them as human shields, right? They're not playing by the same rules of engagement. So conservatives aren't going to be able to, you cannot solve this problem, I don't think, through traditional institutional structures. Because if you could have solved it, it would have been solved already. But it's actually worsened.
Okay. Well,
you may be able to move the needle somewhat, though.
I'm just wondering if there is an elephant in the room we haven't talked about yet. Because
go for it.
You're an atheism professor, and we live in a Judeo-Christian society. It's built up all the values of modern society, and the neoliberals also is a very atheist platform now. They have those values. So do you think they are using the weapons that you have helped create, these arguments to dismantle that?
No, I don't. I think that they're explicitly not, if I understand the question correctly, I think they're explicitly not using arguments, and because an argument is a master's tool. They're ripping down statutes.
Okay. But I mean more of they'd want to dismantle the fabric of
Western civilization. Yeah. And the conservatives are right about that. They really do hate America because they're taught from day one that it's a racist patriarchy. And they're taught to find grievances literally everywhere they look. And I mean that literally. They're literally taught in school to problematize everything. Everything. Find the racism. And if you can't find it, that's either a product of your white fragility, a la Robin DiAngelo, all systems like Kendi and Ta-Nehisi Coates, it's just baked into the system, right? So the problem is with you not being able to see it, not that it's not there. Every disparity of outcome, for example, must have some form of racism as a reason for that.
But the teachings of Christianity, if we all live by those, wouldn't that be a solution?
I guess it depends. It depends. I personally am a fan of living by rationally derivable moral values, like the system of justice of John Rawls. Here's the situation, the odd situation we find ourselves. I published a piece in The American Mind called The Great Realignment. Here's the situation in which we find ourselves. We find ourselves in a situation in which people have been... Did you ever play World of Warcraft?
No, I haven't.
Oh, it's good. It's a save your time. I used to play it. But anyway, there are these warring races. If I remember correctly, it was like the Alliance and the Horde. And the Alliance and the Horde were fighting each other for a long time. And then all of a sudden comes this new race down, like the aliens. Let's go at the aliens. The aliens come. So the Christians and the atheists, they're fighting, etc. And then the aliens, what are they doing, man? They're just taking people wholesale and torturing them. They're just cutting them open, performing medical experiments. They're doing all kinds of crazy shit. And then the atheists and the Christians say, holy shit, like, we have to, this is a problem. Like, this is a problem for humanity. But the problem within that is some atheists decide, oh man, yeah, we need to start blowing shit up too and dissecting people. And then some Christians do. So there are schisms like in the Southern Baptists, and there's schism. I get emails all the time. There are schism. The fault line of the schism is wokeness and oppression variables. And to what degree is the Bible, for example, capable of solving systemic oppression or addressing racist concerns, or do we need some extra textual material or interpretive lenses through which we view these problems? So you have the schisms within Christianity, for example. You have the schisms within the atheist movement. You saw that in Atheism and Atheism Plus. James Lindsay and I did a series in New York called The Trojan Horse that explains this in great detail.
But one of my guests before was Sean Claiborne, who is, have you heard of him, a Christian activist? And
no.
I mean, would you be in agreement with many of like the original teachings of Jesus, in terms of, love and free speech?
I don't know. I mean, look, here's the thing. It's like in Plato's allegory of the cave. Or, I mean, it's Plato's Republic. It's like the myth of the metals. I am a big believer in, again, thinking through problems, rationally deriving solutions. Am I in favor of, I do think many Christian values are rationally derivable. I think we're better off as a society, if you use better off as a metric, being compassionate, being decent toward people.
That's the essence of Christianity,
Yeah, the problem is it comes bundled with some, like you see it in Paul, if you want to look at the, even if you leave out the Old Testament, Deuteronomy and Leviticus, you have the questions about homosexuality. You have other ideas that are unpalatable to modern audiences. But the question is, it's called the substitution hypothesis. And the substitution hypothesis is the idea that is there just something in the nature of the moral mind that latches onto content, and the content that it had latched onto in the West, at least, was Christianity and Christian values, and that allowed us to propel ourselves and sustain ourselves. Fundamentally, I disagree with Hitchens. I do think that fundamentally many of those values are good and decent. I also think that religion does tend to poison everything by the same token. But let's say that you start stomping on traditional moral values, in this case traditional Christian values. The substitution hypothesis would hold that people would just become religious about something else. It would substitute for Christianity, and that's what we're seeing now with the religion of wokeness, which we've spoken about literally thousands of hours. So we've seen I'm not saying I agree with the substitution hypothesis. I'm just offering that out. Sure. So would I prefer some basic Christian values to woke values? I mean, no question about it. I mean, of course. Right? So the question is how do we navigate and move forward as a society, given that there are values that have, the Overton window has shifted, and there are values at play in society that are a threat to the democracy, that are a threat to they're explicitly attempting to rip down the republic. That's why you get, for example, people who are in the Great Realignment, people who are conservatives and liberals teaming up. You get people who are, you get non-woke Christians and non-woke atheists teaming up, and woke Christians and woke. So there's a new fault line in Culture War 2.0.
So do you find yourself you have these new alignments as yourself?
Oh, no question about it. Yeah, no, absolutely no question whatsoever.
Okay. Well, it's a lot to get in a song.
Yeah, it is. And if you've not been thinking about any of this stuff, I realize that everything I've said is rather overwhelming.
Well, yeah, it's because here in the south of Italy, as you can imagine, in the small village where I live, we don't have any of these issues. So, but you're in Poland, you're in the thick of it. So What if I had to sum it up?
Well,
what is the most?
they're coming.
What is the most?
They're coming to you.
What is the most dangerous part of it then? What action can people take? What would you in 3.5 minutes? What would you communicate the most important?
The most dangerous part of it is the lack of cognitive liberty.
Cognitive liberty. Okay.
You have people who don't just want to tell you what to say, but who want to control what you think. And these are people without mercy, and there's no redemption narrative. And they'll cancel you, publish you for things you've said when you're 12 or 14. And this is extraordinarily dangerous to the functioning of civil society. It's the ultimate corrosive. It's a universal solvent to liberalism, to democracy, to any kind of civility and trust between people.
Yeah, even I've shared some things on Facebook and shared some articles, and then they've been removed. And
then people will have you, so they'll see the conversation with you, and you'll get, oh, you're a Nazi, alt-right, pig, fascist, dog. But why? Because of any specific position? No, but because the idea that we should have conversations with people and speak freely in their worldview, that allows racism. That permits people to say racist things. So even advocating free speech, free assembly, freedom of the press, even advocating those things is itself a portal to a racist system in which the master's house is reinforced, and they want to rip down the master's house. So you can't have those basic freedoms. Those are liberalisms. That's why you get, for example, the rioting and the looting and the assaulting people.
Because, the history of America is so anti-communism. You fought it. I mean, that's one of the red lines through America. But it seems that the communists and the ideas are seeped through, and is dismantling the...
Yeah, so I think I understand many people view it that way. Excuse me. I think it's a mistake to view it that way. So, for example, Eric London from the Worldwide Socialist, he is also opposed to this dangerous illiberal ideology. And one of the differences is that you can disagree, as I do, with the communists on either everything or a lot of things or the core principles in which they believe, but they still hold to a grand narrative. They still hold to the idea that communist principles are true independent of your race or gender or the way you're specially situated at a particular time and place. That belief in the fact that there is an objective reality and we can get pretty close to knowing it places them closer to me than those people who view immutable characteristics that have identity level salience. It places the communist closer to my worldview, even though I disagree with the particulars of communism, than it does with those people, because truth is not confined to the immutable characteristics of an utterer. Because somebody is short or fat or black or gay, that is an identity marker for that person. That does not give them privileged epistemic access to truth. And when you understand that, you understand why it's so important that these folks have to subvert the traditional rules of engagement to dismantle the system. It is not hyperbole to say that this is a civilizational threat. Let me tell you something else. He's come up a lot in the conversation. I talk to him almost every day. But my writing partner, we wrote How to Have Impossible Conversations together, and we've done a ton of stuff together. Here's why this is also such a serious problem, and why it's not looking particularly good for us right now. Let's say I gave you a wand. Here it is. My little pen that's made of bone here. Let's say I give you a wand. I hand this to you as a wand. This is a cool wand. You can eliminate the problem of wokeism, and you can extirpate it in every institution, feature and facet of American life, or even in the English-speaking world, except one. You can't eliminate it in the universities.
Mm.
You cannot have an economically competitive, robust democracy when the engines of knowledge production are compromised.
Okay.
It is not possible. So even if somehow you were to wave the wand and extirpate or uproot or eliminate this from every facet of life, you would still be fucked.
Mm. Okay. So you're saying really that it's not fascism, it's not communism, but eventually it's a new type of world order. Or
Illiberalism. Illiberalism ideology. It's an ideology in which even those who don't directly adhere to it are caught in its orbit. You know how many emails I get from people saying to me things like, please help me. My kids have come home from college and they're calling me a racist. I have no idea where this came from. We never talked about it growing up. I have no idea what's going on. Please help me. Mm. My dogs are at the door. Hold on one second. Sorry. Come on, guys. Okay, come on. Sorry about that. Bean, come on. Come on.
So is that right? Why you wrote the book, How to Have the Conversation?
I have a feeling they're going to be way too distracting or distracted. Hold on. Let me get them out of here. Hold on one second. All right. Come on, guys. That's good. You had enough fun. Come on. All right. Come on, Lola. Come on. Let's go. Come on. Let's go. Come on. Apologies.
No problem.
What was your question? Why I wrote the book?
Is that why you wrote the book? Because of these emails from worried people?
No, I wrote the book because I wrote the book to empower people. I wrote the book because there is a way out of this madness. And that way starts with talking to people. There's just no other way. The only other alternative is bloodshed. And that's what you're seeing now. It's division. Mm-hmm. We have to learn to talk to people again.
I heard you say that. I heard you say that
yeah.
The book, the people who most need to read the book were the people who won't read it.
Exactly. But we can't expect reciprocity from people when we try to communicate with them. We can't expect that they'll listen to us. We have to start with us listening to them and believing them. That's the other thing that's difficult for people to accept. So even if they're not willing to listen to you, you need to model the behavior you want to see, and you need to listen to them. That's how this starts.
One of my other guests was Rupert Sheldrake. Have you heard of him?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And what did you think of his ideas about
particular? Which ones in particular?
Spiritualism and the idea that because it's in Western society and also is matter makes consciousness, but whereas consciousness actually makes matter.
I don't know enough about the idea to comment on it. I'm happy to have that conversation with him. I just don't know enough about that idea to comment his work in particular. So I can't comment on it.
He's been on Joe Rogan a few times, and also you've been on there. And I wanted to just expand that conversation out to like spirituality, because if we are spiritual beings, then and there's this love, and we're just having a physical experience in the moment, then
it's a big if, though, right? It's a big if.
I was also studying the University of Virginia. They have a department of perpetual studies about reincarnation, and have you heard of them? Studies from the
No, I don't know that there's a single iota of evidence for reincarnation. But if there is, I'm certainly willing to listen to that evidence. I can't. I mean, you have the whole process of the Dalai Lama allegedly reincarnating, but I have no. I'd love to see what that evidence
Yeah,
is.
there's many studies. They travel around the world speaking to people, and
Yeah, I'd love to see it. Love to. If there's, look, I have no axe to grind against any of this stuff. I am, as we should all be, a slave to the
yeah,
evidence.
100%. Because I was just saying, because we're arguing about different ideologies and the problem, and a lack of spirituality seems to be the undercurrent here.
Yeah, I understand that people would say that. I certainly do not view that as the problem, because what people, I'm not exactly sure what the word spirituality means, but a lot of people manifest their spiritual feelings in different ways. And in some people, maybe that's in the most extreme expressions of that, that's sawing the heads off of infidels with butter knives, right? So different people manifest or even present to their world that, I mean, in the best possible light, it would be that you would love people and show them compassion and decency. Even if you don't like their ideas, you would still treat them as fellow humans. But there's no one way that manifests. Oh my God, my dog is here again. Sorry. Hey, could you close that door?
No problem. I can edit this out. Yeah, I can clean it up later.
All right, sorry about that. I got my new dog Bean, who's a kind of a domestic terrorist.
Oh, yeah. Oh, it's also wondering, because Joe Rogan asks a lot of his guests if they've had psychedelic experiences, and did you ever get asked that when you were on the show?
No, but I cannot talk about that. I cannot talk about that. I'll talk about, it's one of the few things I don't talk about, but I'll talk about that at some point. Okay. Not now. Not. Can't talk about that yet.
Because this spirituality is like this. He says that you open a door into a new room that you never knew was there, and then you can never close it again.
Oh, the DMT stuff. Yeah.
So that's what I'm thinking about with the spirituality and this how this oneness, how we are all one. I've had a lot of guests talk about that as well. So that's
I guess my concern would be, there's a thing, I think it's William James, has this thing on laughing gas. When he's taking laughing gas, he's like, oh, I got to write my insights down as quickly as possible before he writes down all of his insights, and he looks at them later and they're all meaningless. And again, the Republic, he talks about reason being like a chariot, or figuring out how to live like a chariot, and reason should always be the lead horse, and desire and what have you, your appetite should be there. But as long as it's led by reason, it's fine. My concern is that people will mistake their spiritual urges and feelings for something that's true, something that's universal. And I think we have to guard against, Feynman's famous expression, the easiest person to fool is yourself. So while we may have these experiences, I think we need to be very mindful of, by these experiences, I mean spiritual experiences, we need to be very mindful that what we're experiencing, for example, if you're on psychedelics or what have you, is you're on psychedelics, right? And so a word of caution about thinking that you have knowledge, thinking that those experiences translate into knowing something.
One of my other guests was Bernardo Kastrup, who's a philosopher, and he did some research into when you take psychedelics or when you have a near-death experience, it's actually the same kind of thing, because when they've done it where you take a brain scan, and that it shuts down the brain. Psychedelics actually anesthetize, and you're having less brain activity during these experiences, also near-death experiences. So that's kind of, it's obviously not happening in the brain, So that leads rise to the argument that that you are more than your physical body. Do you have any take on that?
That you're more than your physical body, but the only way you would know that is from your physical body, is from the neurological changes in the brain.
Well, when you come back when you come back, they have memories and they have experiences. They say, there's a red shoe on the roof. I've seen it, and things like that. Just one random.
It's like with DMT. It's the purple woman with the tail. It's an astonishingly specific vision that people who have DMT claim to have. And I have a friend of mine, he died, but he claimed, he swore up and down 100% when he was on DMT, he had sex with an alien, like swore it from the bottom of his heart with total sincerity. Excuse me. Other people have reported that as well, but that doesn't mean that, and Michael Shermer's written some good stuff about this, that doesn't mean that he actually had sex with an alien, right?
I haven't heard this.
So oh, you haven't heard that, really, with DMT? Interesting. So I think if you like Purple Woman DMT,
okay, I'll check that out.
And there's an astonishing regularity with that. Yeah. But I think you have to be on guard, because the only way you would know that, if there's quote unquote something else or what have you, is that the brain itself has been manipulated. And it seems to me to be, well, I'll take that qualifier out. It is an extraordinary claim, for example, to state that that consciousness survives the body when the brain there's no conscious activity in the brain, as conscious activity in the brain was a thing that was the only way that you could know there's conscious activity in the brain in the first place. It's just, those things seem to be extraordinary claims that you can't point to your experience of having sex with an alien and say, look, I had sex with an alien.
Maybe we leave the alien.
There's no, yeah. So there's no, that's the other thing. There's no independent verification. So think about it like this, when people come down and say, well, either I've been abducted by aliens, to use an actual alien, or I've, some spiritual being has come to me and has given me great truths. And the truths are always the same, like, love everybody, don't be a dick, stuff like that. But why aren't they, here's how you make a faster superconductor. Here's the solution to bladder cancer. Here's how you solve Goldbach's conjecture. It's never anything like that. It's always these emotional kind of loving, you would need some kind of verification that differentiated an illusion or a delusion from the reality of something that was actually happening to you.
Well, there's with these research into the reincarnation, especially, they've had many, people have been born with they remembered being shot or taking their own life, and they're born with birthmarks, under the chin and a big one on top of the head.
Yeah, I've read some of that stuff. I'm not that familiar with it. My first take is it's total bullshit. But again, I truly am open. If the evidence is there, I will believe it. And that's not a line. That's not a Freud. I'm really sincere about that. And so the question is, we would have to step back and say, okay, is this a question that's worth thinking about? Dan Dennett has a wonderful piece about CHMESS, CHMESS, and questions of abiding significance. It would seem to me that that's a pretty extraordinary claim, if not a very extraordinary claim. And I guess it depends what one's interest would be. I would find that interesting.
It changes everything if you're
more into.
If you're in this perpetual life cycle.
It certainly would, yeah. Yeah, that's right. That's why I think it's a question of abiding significance.
Also, just going back to Joe Rogan, which might seem unrelated, but he's been studying quite a lot of. He's quite a few UFO researchers on, and they've the Navy has given the U.S. Navy.
No, I saw those.
What's your take on
those tapes? My take on that is, here's who I think you should invite. I don't think they're UFOs. I don't think we've been visited by UFOs. That's my quick take. But I think you should think about some future guests. Michael Shermer would be a great, if he'd do it, I don't know. I wouldn't, I'd be very blunt with you. You know, the song thing hooked me because I thought it was cool. I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool. But I really haven't been doing a lot of podcasts because I have some pretty big projects I'm working on. But, and I mentioned it before, I'd have Nick Pope on.
Okay.
I'd talk to him.
All right. Thank you.
And I'd talk to people who have domain specific expertise in that thing. And Shermer has an astonishingly encyclopedic knowledge of all of this stuff. I mean, I have pretty decent familiarity, but nothing like he does. I mean, he's the next level at this stuff.
All right, thank you.
Hey, I can't stay too much longer. Did you have anything else? Because it's 1:22. I have a 1:30 meeting. I haven't even eaten yet.
Okay, sorry to keep you. No, well, it's been...
No. We started late.
No, it's been wonderful chatting to you, and I've got so much, and yeah, it's going to have to be an operatic piece, isn't it? I mean, with all of this, so much going on. So
yeah, there's a lot going on, and it's complicated. It doesn't mean that it's impossible to understand. It just means that you need to take a little more care, and you shouldn't only listen to me. You should listen to people who have diverse voices or other opinions.
Yeah, maybe I'll get
on
one
this.
of some of them. Who would you recommend? Who is the antithesis to you? Who is your?
I don't know if there's any one
nemesis
person. Yeah, I don't know if there's any one person. I also don't know if people will do it. That's the other problem.
What I would like to do in the future is move from, when I have a larger audience, would move from guest-based to issue-based. So to get two opposite people on, or even two people with a discussion, a trilogue.
Yeah, but the problem with that is the people who subscribe to critical social justice, they simply won't do it.
Oh, okay.
I guess if there's one person that I suggest you have on, it's the wiki letter I did with Lori Penny.
Lori Penny.
She seems to be, at least in the conversation that we had on wiki letter, let's see, who wrote the first letter? She wrote the letter, and then I wrote a letter, and then I can't remember what happened. I think the pandemic hit. I didn't remember it. But I had a conversation with her over Skype, and I liked her, even though we have radically different worldviews. I liked her quite a bit. But I think part of the problem that you'll face is that many people who subscribe to this ideology simply don't value communication and conversation, but yet they'll create excuses for that not to be the case. You know, they'll create. Again, they've thought about this. They've had a lot of time. All right, I hate to be rude, but it's 1:24, and I have to. I have a phone call in a few minutes. I haven't even.
You've been a gentleman. Thanks very much.
It's my pleasure, Jack. Let me know when it comes out, and appreciate you taking the time to talk to me and thinking about this stuff.
Oh, thank you, Peter.
You bet, man. All right, cheers.
The master's house can't be dismantled by using the master's tools. That's an anarchic fallacy, and will never set us free. I get to say what you can say. Democracy will end that way. Think reason and rationality instead of violent condemnation. Engage conversation. We must not cooperate with tyranny by claiming mass conspiracy, speaking truth in the face of danger. Parahesia will keep us free. Your way uses the words I say to take away my liberty. Freedom is a hard-won thing. Instead of aggressive condemnation, engage
and welcome to the end of the show. This is traditionally where I ask you to share the episode, rate and review it on your podcast app, and listen to the song on Spotify, iTunes, or even better, download it so you can have it forever from Podsongs.com. It's only €1 or $1, and that money goes to pay for the musicians, Maurizio Sannicola, Massimino Vozza, and my researcher Dori Verbo. Thanks to you, the listener. See you next time.